Good morning. Greetings from Finland. My name is Dr. Virginie Andre. I'm a Senior Research Fellow at Victoria University in Melbourne, Australia.
Hi, and my name is Onni Servela. I'm an exit worker in EXIT Finland.
So today we will talk a little bit about the multi-dimensional role of former extremists in the prevention and countering of violent extremism and intervention work. This initiative started in 2020 with a series of workshops in partnership with different organizations such as EXIT Finland and EXIT Germany. It brought together over the workshops 50 participants from Australia, Northern America, Europe. It brought practitioners from exit work, prison and rehabilitation, law enforcement, policy makers, as well as former extremists themselves and frontline practitioners from the grassroots. Now, the workshops were held in June and October 2020, and it addressed a series of key questions. The first workshop really tried to unpack that notion of former extremists. What do we understand by former extremists? What is a former extremist? What is the disengagement process from the former extremist perspective and the exit workers' perspective, and also whether there's any role for former extremists to play in the prevention and countering of violent extremism as well within exit work. The second workshop had a particular focus from the law enforcement perspective, trying to understand what are the benefits and challenges and also the risk associated with working with former extremists. So now in 2021, we will have a series of workshops with the third one looking at specifically from a community perspective, how do community respond to former extremists, whether they see any issue in working with former extremists, and how we can assist to bridge communities with former extremists working in this particular field, and particularly within the prevention of violent extremism. So what do we understand by former extremists? Well, a former extremist, first of all, we need to look at what kind of exit factors there may be. So we are going to talk about three. So the first one is the disillusionment towards the extremist group, the physical and emotional exhaustion from the dysfunctional violent extremist environment, and also social relationship and encounters can be factors contributing to a person wanting to leave an extremist group. We need to understand this, that it is a non-linear voluntary process, so that disengagement process is actually voluntary. So a former extremist is a person that has formally engaged in extremist activities and or thinking, has undergone a transformative process of critical self-reflection, has gone through a process of rehumanization, has also rebuilt a strand of identity away from violent extremism, rebuilt social networks and trust relationships away from violent extremism. And of course, there's always a risk of recidivism, and then we have to go back through that process again. But this is really what makes a former extremist. It's a person who has gone through all those different processes.
Some of the benefits engaging the formers, first of all, they can act as a role models for change, providing especially for young people, the model for that. They can act agents of counter-polarization and community bridge building, and they can provide information from radicalization process, disengagement process, and generally about extremist milieus. What of the challenges might be? There is a possibility for re-traumatization or even recidivism. There is, of course, the questions of community acceptance very often. And there are some security issues, not only for the formers themselves, but also for the third parties, like for the family members. Where we can engage the formers? The education in school, also outside of school. Also the security authorities can engage them for information purposes. As well, they can be also engaged in research and intervention programs. There is also the kind of public and media events where they can be also engaged.
Mm-hmm. So at the practical level, some of the recommendations we would like to suggest is that First of all, yes, the answer to the question is that yes, there is a role for former extremists to play in the prevention and countering of violent extremism and also intervention work. And as Onni mentioned, there are different contexts and environments in which they can actually be helpful. But we also need to be mindful of how do we effectively involve former extremists, and also to avoid any possibility that we might be damaging their exit process from violent extremism. So there's a duty of care around this. But in terms of practices for local authorities, I think one of the best ways to involve former extremists is in the prevention campaigns. They can be very helpful in trying to assist in the formulation of some of those campaigns and efforts, particularly perhaps around narratives and also public interventions around that notion that change is possible. So this is where we would suggest some of the recommendations that yes, they can be helpful at the local level, but you need to be thinking about your target audience and what it is that you're trying to achieve while involving former extremists, and also having a duty of care around their involvement in the field. Thank you.